It's a 2010 Honda Rancher 420 4x4 electric shift. I'm going to replace the coolant in the coolant system. First thing I'm going to do is take this little cap off right here using a Phillips head, and doing that will expose the top of the radiator where the radiator cap is. And there it is, the top of the radiator cap. So I have not run the engine yet. It is cold. On the right hand side of the engine here, this is the water pump. Right there where my finger's touching, this is the drain bolt. It's the lowest point in the coolant system, so we're going to take that bolt out and have your catch pan ready. I've already got it underneath, ready to go. Hopefully I catch at least most of this, and I've got some cardboard down to hopefully get the rest. This is going to make a mess no matter what you do. So let's get that bolt off. Alright, I loosened the bolt with a 10mm wrench. So I'm going to pull the bolt off the rest of the way, and I've got the catch pan ready to go underneath. Let's see if I can catch most of this. It's almost off, and it is coming out now. Alright, so I haven't taken the cap off yet on top. That's why it's not flowing. So let's go remove the radiator cap, and that should let the fluid go. Alright, as you can see, it is coming straight out. I'm trying to catch most of it here. Comes out like a pretty good once you get that cap off. So I'm going to just keep the catch pan underneath it as best I can, and we're going to let this drain out all the way. Once it's drained, we'll go to the next step. Alright, so drained out the radiator. Next step is to take the seat off, set that aside. Below this protective cap is the top of the coolant. So I'm going to remove this. It just pops off. And there's 4 connectors on it. And then it disconnects from your brick tail light compartment. Pop, pop, and it should come right out. There we go. Alright, so there is the fill cap for the coolant overflow reservoir. I'm not going to put coolant in it, but what I'm going to do is to get the coolant out of here, so we got to remove this as well. I'm going to unbolt this reservoir from the back here. There's a couple bolts that hold it on, and then we're just going to dump it from there into the the catch reservoir, and we'll flush it out with some distilled water. So let me go get some wrenches and we'll do that. Alright, so I've unbolted the reservoir. I already pulled the cap. So what I'm going to do is just dump it out here in my catch basin. Get rid of that old coolant. And let that drip a little bit. Then we get some distilled water, and we'll just kind of rinse it out in there a little bit, and then dump that as well. Alright, I added distilled water to this, put the cap back on, so I'm just going to slosh it around a little bit, and this will get all the old coolant kind of cleaned up, and then we'll pop the cap on it and let that dump out. There we go, nice and clean. So now we'll replace the cap here, and oops, came off. We'll take the cap, put it back on, and then we will bolt this back in place. And I forgot to mention earlier, but it uses a 10mm size socket. So I use my 10mm socket with a long extension, and that allowed me to get back up in there where the bolts were, where the reservoir bolts into place. So I'm going to bolt that back in place, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, I put the drain plug back into the bottom of the water pump. Now we're going to add distilled water to the radiator. little by little. I'm going to pour it in. And this is just water, so if I overflow, it's no big deal. But when we pour in the coolant later, we got to make sure we don't spill it. Let that get throughout the radiator. And I think we're reaching the top here. It's about to overflow. Yep. Alright. With the radiator full of water, we're going to start the engine up. Run it until it warms up and allow that to circulate throughout the system. And once it circulates throughout the system for a little bit, we'll turn it off and let the engine cool. So we ran the engine, let it cool down a little bit so I don't burn myself, but there's the water, the distilled water coming out. Catching most of it if I can. It does have coolant in it. Using the same method, I put the cap back on up top first, then pull the drain plug, then take the cap off. That way it doesn't, you get hot burning fluid all over you. So we'll let that drain out. Once it's drained, we'll put the plug back in. So let's wait for this to drain. Alright, all the water's been drained. So here's the drain plug, what it looks like. Just make sure you put that washer back on. It's a copper washer. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back on and tighten it down. Alright, the bolt's back in. It's time to fill the radiator. This is what I'm using. Engine Ice High Performance Coolant. Silicate free 50/50. This is what was recommended by the dealership where I bought this, the Honda dealership. So this is what we're going to use. And we're going to do like we did with the distilled water. We're going to pour it in nice and slow. I might do it slower this time because I can't afford to spill any of this. Just a little at a time. Make sure it goes in all throughout the radiator. I'm going to wait till we top it off. Once it's topped off, we'll start the engine up. I'm going to pause the video for now, but what I'm going to do is top this off and then I'll get back to you when we run the engine. Alright, I filled the radiator up to the top there, so now what we're going to do is start the engine up. What we're going to do is run it until we see the level in the radiator drop. When it drops, we'll keep adding fluid to it until it stays topped off with the engine warm. Alright, so we're going to let the engine warm up some more. Keep adding fluid to it. I warmed the engine up real good. The fan came on. It's about as hot as it usually gets. The level in the radiator dropped a little bit, and I went ahead and topped it off with a little more fluid and put the cap on. That should be it. So now the last step after the cap's on is to fill up, or no, I'm sorry, don't fill up, but add fluid. So there's already some in there, fluid to the reservoir. So some actually already went in, it looks like. So I'm just going to add a little bit more to get it up to this first line. It's hard to see in the camera, but this says upper, and this is the lower. You don't want to go above this lower. I'm sorry, but not too much above the lower. So I'm just going to put enough fluid in there to get it right to that line, and that should be more than enough. And we're going to do that through the coolant spout on top here. So I'm just going to do a little bit at a time. Take a peek. Oh, that might have been it right there. Maybe just a tad bit more. Tad. And that'll do it. And there you are. So it's now at the lower level. And we'll put the cap back on. And the coolant flush and replace is done. Just got to put everything back together the way it was. Put the cap back on, and then put this plastic cover back on that goes over the battery. Get on there. And then we're done. I might need 2 hands for this. But anyways, cap's back on. Put the plastic cover back on, which just snaps into place. Seat goes back on. We're ready to go. Hope this helps, and thanks for watching.